what we're gonna do in this video is make our version, or the local version, let's say, of the sort of the caramel pecan pie bar. We're gonna make a chocolate caramel macadamia nut bar. So the first thing we're gonna start with is a crust, and then we're gonna do the filling and all kinds of fun stuff. But let's get the crust going. So sure, you're gonna put in flour. Go ahead and dump that in. We've got brown sugar. This is macadamia nuts. We have some salt, and we have some baking powder. Okay. Now, essentially what we're doing is we're making the crust, or we're making like a pie crust. The first thing that we're gonna do is get the sort of the dry ingredients all evenly incorporated together. So go ahead and pulse it. Keep going. Pulse, pulse, pulse. Perfect. Okay, you can open it. Next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna put in the butter. The butter's been cubed up, and the butter is still cold. It just came straight out of the refrigerator. It's very important when you're making this that the butter has to be cold. What we're gonna do is we're gonna put it in. Go ahead. And she's gonna continue to pulse it, and we want a flaky crust. So she's gonna pulse this until the butter incorporates, but we still see small sort of pearl or pea-sized pieces of butter, and that's what's gonna help us have a flaky crust. Go ahead. Keep going. Some more. Keep going. Okay, stop. Perfect. Perfect.
Okay.
So I have an 8x8 pan, and we line the pan with foil. The thing about the reason I have this lined with foil and I sprayed it is because it will make it easier to get this bar out when it's done. You don't have to do that. I mean, in professional kitchens, typically we wouldn't do that. We would just spray it. But you know, if this is the first time you're doing it, or you don't bake all the time, and you're kind of worried, you're like, oh, I don't know if it's going to get stuck. Well, this is one of those things you can do to help ensure that it's not going to get stuck. Now, what I've been doing is pressing this into the pan, and if you feel it, and you can feel it if you want, I'm trying to make sure it's evenly pressed in and compacted down. What we're going to do now is take this and bake it in the oven at 350 degrees for about 20 minutes, and we're par baking this so that we can get that crust to set or to bake. So when we pour our liquid filling on top and then finish baking that, the crust finishes baking, but it's not going to be raw in the center. Okay? So we're going to come back with a finished crust, and then we'll make the filling.
Okay.
Cool.
So we took the crust out of the oven, and now we're ready to make the filling.
And I'm so tired from the pressing of the crust. I want to ask if you could go ahead and put all these ingredients in here.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's taxing, man, I swear. So what do we got? That's macadamia nuts, yeah?
Chocolate chips.
Yeah.
Brown sugar.
Yep.
I asked Keone, where's the caramel? But we're gonna make the caramel.
Exactly. What'll happen is she's got the brown sugar. We got corn syrup that's going in here. And the action of the baking process is going to bring it together, and actually it's going to caramelize the product in here, and then we'll have caramelized happiness at the end.
And this is bourbon.
Yep, that's bourbon. You can use bourbon or rum. In this case, we're using bourbon.
Salt.
A little salt.
And 2 teaspoons. Oops.
Okay. And what I have here is a little melted butter. Now the thing on the butter, make sure you melt the butter and that it's cool, not hot, because if it's hot, it will start to melt the chocolate and everything, okay? So I'm going to pour that in here. Go ahead and just mix it all up.
You can go ahead.
All right. You're tired now, right? Okay, so the egg is in there. That's going to help set this filling here. We've got the brown sugar and we've got the corn syrup that's going to be the part that caramelizes and makes it all happy. Then we've got our nuts and our chocolate. It's going to give us the macadamia nut chocolate part of it. So here we have our filling.
Oh, that looks good.
And then I'm going to just go ahead and pour it into the pan. Of course, making sure that we scrape it so that we're not wasting anything. This is where all the flavor is. And then we're just going to go ahead and level it out here.
So now when it bakes, chocolate chips will just melt.
The chocolate chips will not melt into a sauce. They will melt, and the corn syrup will caramelize and sort of make that filling, sort of pecan pie-ish type feeling. And then the nuts will toast, and they'll get nice and crispy. So what we're gonna do is take this back in the oven, finish baking it. When it's done, bring it out, let it cool,
and then
cut it up, and do the dirty hard work of eating.
Okay, we'll be back.
So we've finished baking this. We let it cool. It's let it set. Now this one is a beautiful one. It's gonna taste great. But one of the things I don't like necessarily about this particular one is how a lot of the nuts and the chocolate sort of went down.
Yeah.
Now, if you want to make sure that doesn't happen in a recipe, that you need to ensure that when you do the recipe, take half of the nuts and half of the chocolate and keep it on the side. Then you make your mix like we did. Pour it in. And then before you bake it, take the nuts and the chocolate and sprinkle it back on top of that mix and put it in. Those pieces that you put in secondarily won't be mixed with
on the
all
top.
of the right. It won't have the caramel and all that stuff that's on there.
Okay.
So that it should stay higher on the bake. When it rises, it'll push up and come back down. It should still be on the top.
So you should see it.
Yeah, you should see more than poking up through the top. Okay. So I'm gonna take it out. Yeah, exactly. Take it. Thank you. But see how easy this was to take out? Okay, now I'm gonna just flatten this down here a little bit. Take it out. Yeah, and now let's go ahead and cut it. So, 1, 2. You hear how it's when I'm cutting into it, it sounds really crispy, right?
Yeah.
And it's almost, the bottom's almost gonna be like shortbread. So. And when I'm cutting it, you notice like I don't go like start this way and go. I always go from the middle out, because that way I'm cutting this in half. Then I'm cutting my half in half and my other half in half. It helps me give me more even pieces. So why don't you go ahead, or I'll go ahead and plate these up. And then if you would do the honors, once I get these plated up, of putting some, hang on for 1 second. Let me put some on here, build it up.
So even if you do it the other way, like you said, where you save half of the nuts and chocolate chips and you put it on the top, you can still put the powdered sugar at the very end if you want.
You know, I asked my grandma that question when I was younger, and she said, Keone, there's always room for powdered sugar. Perfect festive, you know, it's great for get-togethers, occasions. I love this for Christmas. I love this for, well, I love it for the weekend too. But,
okay, I'm going to try.
Okay, you go.
No, you go.
You pick one.
I'll take the end.
All right, I'll take this one. Before we bite into this bad boy, we want to remind you guys that you can get more videos and recipes like this
at foodland.com.